Right now, the news that's unfolding is incredible. Trump arrived in Saudi Arabia and he had his meeting in Saudi Arabia. So as we go through this, we're going to see some things that have already started to unfold. And I think that we should really be encouraged because we are seeing biblical prophecy unfold right before our eyes. And there's so much happening right now. I encourage you guys to stay on Telegram because that's probably where you're going to see the news. And you can join my Telegram. I'll put a link out again if you haven't already. You can join in Keegan Fernandez. He does a great job with keeping up with it. In time headlines, all of them do a really great job of keeping up with what's happening as it's happening because this stuff is coming out uh, as we speak. I mean, I'll look at the news and I'll look at the news 6 hours later, and it's things are happening and unfolding so quickly. But tonight we're going to look at America and Israel at odds. And so I think we're seeing some things in the optics that we may see change. So I'll unpack that a little bit. I think there's more going on than what we see, and we see the news of war. See a lot of news about talking about this peace that we know is a false peace coming, and there's a lot of lies with a little bit of truth mixed in. And we're going to talk a lot about the Abraham Accords tonight because that I think is really the big thing prophetically that's being pushed forward this week. And there's a lot going on with that. You guys know we have done extensive studies on the Abraham Accords before. I believe this is a counterfeit of the Abrahamic covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And I do believe that this is the front runner for the covenant with many. Actually, I am actually dogmatic about this. I do believe this is the covenant with many. Now, I could be wrong. We are seeing these things unfold, but this to me is a dead ringer. So, Isaiah 28:14 through 15. Therefore, hear the word of the Lord, O scoffers, who rule this people in Jerusalem. So this is God is speaking directly to the leaders of Israel. For you said, we have made a covenant with death. We have fashioned an agreement with Sheol, with hell. When the overwhelming scourge, that's war, passes through, it will not touch us, because we have made lies our refuge and falsehood our hiding place. And so we see um, here Witkoff eyes expanding the Abraham Accords, and that's what this whole Trump showing up in Saudi Arabia today and him being in the middle of the East, making all these, a lot of these are economic deals, weapons deals. That's a lot of what's going on. But the Abraham Accords is in the shadows and in the background of all of this. And so here, expanding the Abraham Accords is center to it as Israel readies Gideon's chariots. Now, Gideon's chariots is what Israel has codenamed the operation to go into Gaza and destroy Hamas. And they have said, even today, that's it. They're not playing around. They're going to go into Gaza and they're going to completely remove Hamas. They're going to level it. They're going to own it, and they're not going to give, and that's the way it's going to be forever. And so they have made no bones about that at all. And so we go in here, we're witnessing this strengthening and expanding of the Abraham Accords right now. Now, the Abraham Accords, they began September 2020. So they began almost 5 years ago. And I remember it well because immediately my gut sank. I had a sick feeling of dread because immediately I knew, and many, especially in the Watchman community, knew this was blasphemous and very bad for America. And when I saw it conceived, the beginning of the Abraham Accords, um, I knew it was bad, but now it's growing. Anybody, honestly, any believer right now who knows God's word should be concerned for America and for any nation that would be part of this. And we know all nations are going to end up being maybe not part of the Abraham Accords, obviously, but are going to be part of this pressuring Israel and turning against Israel. And so um, Kushner then, Jared Kushner, which is, of course, Trump's son-in-law, he was huge behind the scenes in pushing this forward and really making the Abraham Accords what they are. And so he is reemerging. He's been in the background, again, advising the Trump administration ahead of this Middle East trip. And we're going to look at this because the involvement that he has is really, really key. He looks like he's, and he is more behind the scenes, but what he is doing is very, very concerning when you're looking at this from a biblical perspective. There's a lot going on here that is, I believe, really God is putting a lot of these puzzle pieces in place so his children would see it and would be encouraged and would know that time is very, very short. So, exclusive Kushner's, this was just April 3rd, Kushner's Abraham Accords Institute. And so he created an institute for the Abraham Accords, is going to merge into the Heritage Foundation. We're going to unpack this in a little bit. This is extremely interesting. And this right here really shows the combination of how the Abraham Accords is not just about peace and prosperity, but it is also about idolatry. It is also biblical in the sense that Israel is going to fall for the Antichrist. She's going to fall for this false Messiah. And we see so much of that built in when we look at the Heritage Foundation. So, this covenant between the Abraham Accords, this covenant between the children of Abraham, and really, this is connected to the three Abrahamic faiths. We've seen over and over again the Abraham Accords really locking in with the Abrahamic family house, which was the Pope's baby with a mosque, a synagogue, and a Catholic church. And so we see how these things are moving together and something that looks like it's really a picture of the harlot Babylon from Revelation 17 and 18. This harlot religious system is riding the beast Antichrist system. So when you see the Abraham Accords, this counterfeit of God's covenant that he made with Israel, and then the Abrahamic family house, this this is a counterfeit of course, God's relationship with us and the gospel. And so you see how already we can see the beginning here of the harlot and the Antichrist beast system. And so here the Abraham Accords falsely promise this Abrahamic, that all three Abrahamic faiths falsely promises to move Israel into safety, security, and prosperity with her neighbors. Now, of course, we know that right there should anybody that is watching for Jesus, that should make your ears tingle when looking at Thessalonians 5, 2 through 4. And so a huge catch here is that part of the Abraham Accords is creating a two-state solution. It's creating the state of Palestine. And even Saudi Arabia, here, Saudi Arabia seems to be the main focus for Trump because he knows Getting Saudi Arabia on board with the Abraham Accords will bring in the rest. And so that's the main focus for him. He said today he would do anything for MBS, for the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. He would do anything for him. And so we see here, they're number one, they will not go into the Abraham Accords unless there is a two-state solution. Now, if you know scripture, you know that is a very bad idea. And so God is very clear that the consequences of dividing his land is not good. So here, 1 Thessalonians 5, 2-4, for you are fully aware that the day of the Lord, this is when the tribulation begins, will come like a thief in the night. While people are saying peace and security, and we know the UN, the global leaders, they like to say peace and security constantly. I saw a little video of Trump and he said peace, security, and prosperity over and over and over again today from Saudi Arabia. And he said that it's never been possible to achieve peace, security, and prosperity until now. So I think that's kind of interesting. So here, while people are saying peace and security, destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains on a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you, brothers, are not in darkness that that day should overtake you like a thief. Now we know that this is really talking about, I believe this is talking about the rapture, that we're going to be taken out in the midst of this planning of this peace and prosperity. So peace here can mean prosperity. Peace and security, peace and prosperity. That's what we hear over and over again, tied with the Abraham Accords, tied with peace in the Middle East. So it's tied to the peace of mind that comes from trusting in God. But Israel is going to put her trust in man as a substitute for trusting in God. And no, that's exactly what she's doing. And as we go further in the study, you're going to see it's exactly what she's doing is putting her trust in a man and even tying it to scripture and tying it to Messiah. So no wonder that God is so angry about this because this is idolatry. It is cutting up his land that he gave her, and it's trusting in man rather than trusting in him. So Israel isn't the only one committing this idolatry either. By looking to nations and politicians to save them, the people who profess right now to be God's people, Jews and Christians, are looking as a whole. The majority of people that profess to know God right now are looking to the world more than ever to save them. They are more tied up in politics now than ever. Israel has been blinded in part. And so in part, they have been blinded in part for our benefit. And it's going to take the tribulation. It's going to take them messing up and entering into the tribulation for the scales to fall off their eyes and for them to receive Jesus and to figure this out. But for Christians, this is really disappointed. This is really disappointing because we should know better. When we see these things unfold, we should all have our eschatology spidey sense going off like crazy right now. We should all be seeing the day approaching, and we should all be looking to Jesus and not to any politician at all right now. We should all be looking to Jesus and seeing that all the politicians, all the nations are doing exactly what God said that they would do. And that is set up to give everything over to the beast. And so the lie here is coexistence for peace and prosperity. That Israel can coexist with her neighbors for peace and prosperity. We know that's a lie. Israel should know full well that that's a lie because every time she's tried to give up land, it has just meant more destruction. But they're going to keep doing this. They're going to make the mistake again. So this week, talks are happening in the Middle East. And they're going to continue at the UN conference taking place on June 2nd to 4th in New York. And they are in order and to put a two-state solution in place for Israel and Palestine. That is the plan. Here, the UN can end the Middle East conflict by welcoming Palestine as a member. Yeah, right. Like this is going to end the conflict by further dividing God's land. But that's the lie. So here, this time frame, this June 2nd to 4th, when this is going to happen in New York, mind you, that just happens to be Shavuot. That just happens to be Pentecost, the very feast of the Lord that God confirmed his covenant with the nation of Israel when he brought them out of Egypt, and they at the foot of the mountain said, I do. That is to Israel, that is considered their marriage day. That is considered their betrothal and their marriage between God and Israel. That first Pentecost, Shavuot. And so now that is going to be a time when the plan is to come together to further carve out God's land and to further desecrate his covenant that he made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to completely rewrite his Abrahamic covenant to the Abraham Accords, completely rewriting what God did. So Exodus 19:5. Now, if you will indeed obey, this is that covenant that God made with Israel. If you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession out of all the nations, for the whole earth is mine. And so here, this treasured place, and he gave them that land. And we've gone completely through that as well. So the topic of the two-state solution and the Abraham Accords is also on the docket for the annual UN General Assembly that just happens to fall on the Feast of Trumpets on Rosh Hashanah this September. And so here we see the UN General Assembly is going to happen September 23rd. It's going to be going up commencing on September 23rd. And it's anticipated that the two-state solution is going to be on the docket. And that is, of course, right there, smack dab in the middle of Rosh Hashanah. And so, of course, that's what the enemy always does, is have his evil signing covenant time at the Feast of Trumpets. And so here we see also the entire world is literally gathering together to divide God's land. That's what the whole world is going to do. The leaders of the world are coming together in New York in June, and then also coming together again in New York. I think it's interesting that New York seems to be the center for where all this happens, and they're going to be coming together again for the General Assembly to come together to choose to divide God's land. And so what does God do? We know God, this ends very badly for all the nations that take part in this. And that's why any believer, when you see your nation taking center stage in trying to divide God's land, it should be a very sobering thing for you. And it's bittersweet because we know this is God's word happening before our eyes, but we also know this is not good for our nation in any way, shape, or form. So Joel 3:2, I will gather all, this is God speaking, I will gather all nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. There I will enter into judgment against them concerning my people, my inheritance Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations as they divided up my land. So to understand why this is happening from a biblical perspective and why this is in opposition to God. We need to remember God's covenant with Abraham, that this is a counterfeit of that covenant. And we've done an extensive study, and this is what the video looks like. If you want to go back in and find the video where we go through the history of the covenant and why this is such a bad idea. Um, we looked into it in detail. And so God promised the land to the specific line from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The land does not belong to all of Abraham's offspring. And the counterfeit Abrahamic covenant, the Abraham Accords, the world is pushing Israel right now is a twisting of the promise that God gave. And so in Daniel 9, God tells us that this covenant with many will be confirmed. So we know this will happen. Israel will confirm this covenant. And it's going to be made stronger, confirmed or made stronger. Confirmed in Daniel 9, J.D. Farag does a great study on this. That word for confirmed is gebir, and it means make stronger or expand. So here, what we're seeing happen with the Abraham Accords fits perfectly in with the meaning of this word here, that it is expanded and it's made stronger. And so in Isaiah 28, God calls this, and I believe it's the very same covenant, he calls this covenant Israel makes a covenant with death and hell. So obviously, God's not a fan of this covenant, but Israel, even though these scriptures are in the Old Testament, these scriptures are in the Tanakh. Israel's blinded in part right now to what's happening. She's looking to the nations and to politicians who are speaking flattering words to her to save her. And that's what she did. That's what she did all throughout history. That's what she did in the Old Testament, you see. And the false prophets then, just like the false prophets today, would say, oh, no, no, nothing bad is going to happen. Um, God's not going to allow these things to happen. And so Israel would fall into the same place where she would put her trust in the surrounding nations that would then end up destroying her and carrying her away. But she would put her trust in them and in politicians and in kings rather than trusting God and rather than doing what God's prophets told her to do, which was repent and turn to God. So here we see um, there's a lot of fear right now, I think, in Israel because she doesn't quite know where she stands. As Trump heads to the Gulf, Israel asks where it stands. And so here there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of rumors about maybe being a rift between Netanyahu and Trump. And so there are a lot of rumors right now about America turning on Israel. And honestly, the optics are looking worse and worse for the relationship between America and Israel right now. Um, but even so, I don't believe that it's really the case yet. Now, yes, America and all nations will completely turn on Israel. That will happen. Um, Israel is going to make this covenant with death because she feels that this is her refuge, though. And if all nations are turning against her before she makes the deal, why is she going to make the deal? She's making this deal with death because she thinks it's her only hope. So I do believe that America is still a huge player in helping her feel safe. One day all the nations will turn on her, but for right now, I think this is actually more of a bargaining strategy than a real true rift. I think it's more perhaps of the art of the deal, where and honestly, this may be kind of a juvenile way to think about it, but my first thought is it's like the whole playing hard to get with the dating. because in a lot of ways, Trump and America have been love bombing Israel and just coming with everything. And it's very, the way it goes a lot of times when somebody that's really out to get you, they'll love bomb you and then they'll kind of step back a little bit because that's how you get something from the person that you want to get something from, is then to step back. And that being part of the art of the deal there, it may just be part of making Israel bend in a way that she didn't want to bend. So maybe that's part of getting her to divide, getting her to do this two-state solution that Israel has been very open about not wanting to do this, not thinking that it is absolutely suicide. And so maybe that's part of what this is. I don't really think that we're going to see America completely turn on Israel right now. I don't think that's the case, but I do think maybe this is a bargaining chip. But here we see Netanyahu-Trump relationship is strained over differing Middle East solutions. Hamas and US reach a deal. I think we'll have to detox from US security assistance, says Netanyahu. And we have seen today, Netanyahu has come right out yesterday and today and said, this is it. Um, we are going into Gaza and we're going to level it. And that is really interesting that he's saying that, because we know biblically that is what happens. Biblically, one way or another, Gaza will be completely leveled. Read Zephaniah 2. Gaza will be completely leveled, but it will not be rebuilt. This is not going to end up being rebuilt for hotels and the, Riviera of the Middle East. That's not going to happen. It will be left for flocks of Judah. And it may be that it's leveled with every intention to be rebuilt, but then it's not because the tribulation happens. But we know biblically it won't be rebuilt. And so it's interesting to see how these things come forward. Um, Trump, the Middle East visit, Israel shifts from central player to distant observer. And again, that the peripheral here from Israel being, America being the best friend ever of Israel, to Israel kind of being on the back burner, and threats even being made that the Abrahamic Accords, that these deals will go through without Israel having a say in it, which is interesting how that could even happen. So, is America turning her back to Israel? And again, I don't think so just yet. I do believe this is a bargaining strategy. And so, although I don't think that this is happening yet, I don't think that this is a good thing. I think that the part that America is playing in luring Israel into the Abraham Accords is extremely dangerous. Um, if you have any fear of God at all, this should be very concerning to you. Outright cursing God's chosen land, Israel, and his chosen people, Israel, is obviously a very bad idea. God clearly states those who bless Israel will be blessed, those who curse her will be cursed. But luring her into a deal that will divide her land is arguably a worse idea if you have any fear of God. If you know Scripture, this is a very bad idea. So this is, after all, the reason God gathers all nations together to destroy them. This is the reason he gives, because they divided his land. So America has been Israel's last defender and protector for many years. America has been the one that would veto and would stand up in the UN's meetings. The UN has been so just vehemently, demonically against God's people. It's ridiculous. And America has been the only defender in a lot of cases. America's been her only real ally in a sea of hateful nations that are bent on destroying her. And as a result, America has been blessed, and Israel has put her trust in America. Now, we know how this ends biblically. And I'd always hoped that, it would be because of the rapture, because we know biblically, Israel doesn't have anybody during the tribulation to run to but God. And that's actually where she finds her salvation. It's because she no longer has anybody to run to but God. And so I'd always hoped that that was because the rapture had happened. And it took America out because, the rapture happened and it weakened America. But now it appears the trust that has been stored up may be used to lure Israel into this covenant with many that starts the tribulation and as a result secures the destruction of all the nations. And it may just be that America is at the head of the nations that are destroyed. Um, there are very strong cases when you look at Babylon, the city, and Generation 2434. Tyler does the best job I have seen of describing how the seat of Babylon being in America now, and specifically even in New York. And so, with everything that's going on with the UN meetings and with the way that everything is coming together to lure her into this, it is interesting how that may be what happens. It may be that the rapture weakens America, but it may be the real reason that America is not there to protect Israel is because of this, because of luring her into making this deal with death and an immediate hit to America as a result of that sudden destruction. So that's my speculation. I do not know, but that is looking more and more like it could be the case. So Israel sees recognition of Palestinian state will force unilateral actions in response. So right now, Israel is seeing this recognition of a Palestinian state to be a direct affront. And so something is going to have to give, really, I believe, in order for Israel to be a willing participant in this. And the covenant with many will usher in Jacob's trouble. So this is going to be the worst time in history. And it's also going to bring in salvation for Jacob and Israel, for Jacob, which is Israel. And so, we see everything coming together for the tribulation. Right now, it's not just the Abraham Accords that are being expanded and worked on right now in the Middle East. Beast technology, beast system insanity is happening right now. We have AI. Saudi Arabia just launched their AI system, which is called Humane, Humain. And so they have, along with Trump, Elon Musk, Sam Altman. They've got technocrats. I believe Ellis, they've got a bunch of them. They've got where you can see like a list. I think Bubba News, he does a great job of keeping up with things. I think he did a list of those that were there, and you can look at the videos and see who all was there, shaking hands with MBS in Saudi Arabia today. But so much is going forward with this entire control system that's going to be used during the tribulation. So it's very interesting because here we see the covenant being strengthened and being worked on along with the system itself to rule the people. And it's really very, very interesting what all is unfolding this week. So just because America here, um, so okay, so believers here, we need to understand that this is bittersweet. It can be exciting because we're seeing the Bible happen. And we know as we see the tribulation get so close, we know our rescue comes first. We know if we see the tribulation this close, if we can almost see the white of the Antichrist eyes, even though we don't know who he is, we're watching for Jesus, not for the Antichrist, but we are so close. That means seeing our King is even closer. We are about to see Jesus face to face. And so we know the end of the story, but we still should not celebrate what God clearly calls evil. God will destroy all the nations that are part of dividing Jerusalem. Zechariah 12:3. We know what he thinks about these things, so we should have no part in celebrating them. Just because America is pressuring the covenant as the good cop, in contrast to nations bent on destroying Israel, doesn't change the truth that dividing the land, that is God's red line. That's it. Zechariah 12:3, and in that day I will make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut to pieces, though all people of the earth would be gathered together against it. The whole world right now is trying to get this Middle East deal done. This is, Macron is in on it. They're all the world leaders. This is at the forefront in June, right at right at Pentecost, right at Shavuot time, right? Why does the enemy want to strategically pick God's holy days? Because I think he's poking the eye of God with these things. Pentecost, they'll be meeting to divide God's land. Trumpets, Rosh Hashanah, they'll be meeting to try to divide God's land. So right now, the world is telling Israel the only way to peace, security, and prosperity. We know when they say peace and security, sudden destruction will come upon them. So right now, the whole world is telling Israel their only way is by dividing their land, their God-given land. The land actually belongs to God. Remember, he said, for dividing my land, it's his land, and he gave it to Israel. No, it's already been cut up. It's already done. The land has already been cut up, and they're going to continue to cut it up. But it's going to continue to be compromised, and it's going to continue to be done for a lie. And so here, President Trump will issue a declaration regarding the state of Palestine and the American recognition of it. And there will be an establishment of a Palestinian state without the presence of Hamas. So thinking maybe that will be a cherry to give to Israel in the mess of all of that. And then here, Smoltrich said Israel will not commit suicide for ties here with Rado, for ties here with Saudi Arabia. So they're saying they don't want to commit suicide in order to do this. Here he said normalization will only happen through the peace for peace formula and not by establishing a Palestinian terror state. So they have to feel like they have some assurance that it's not going to be a terror state. So Saudi optimistic about securing Trump backing for Palestine recognition this week. Again, this should make anybody that knows the Bible, this should make you very nervous for our nation because God is very clear to not do this, to not divide up God's land. And so here, I believe the Saudis and Qataris plan to pressure our country for a Palestinian state or something akin to it during this trip. Now, I want to just pause right here because what did Qatar give Trump? They gave him a palace in the sky. And Syria is is promising him a Trump Tower in Damascus. Now we know that's not going to work out well because Damascus is going to be destroyed. But yeah, this is very, very interesting. And understand Qatar, they are supporters of Hamas and terrorists. Syria, supporter of ISIS. These are terrorist organizations, terror funders, terror nations, giving gifts to try to secure dividing up Israel. This is very, very bad. So for Qatar, it means a permanent terrorist state will continue to fund and try to destroy Israel. Remember, Qatar is a close ally of Iran's and has spent billions on Hamas, the Taliban, and terror groups throughout the world. For the Saudis, they believe it will be a face-saving measure to enable them to join the Abrahamic Accords. See, it's all about dividing the land of Israel and making this covenant with death. No one has told me this. I'm just watching and observing. And yeah, that appears to be more and more what is actually unfolding. So the counterfeit Abrahamic Covenant, the Abraham Accords, is the remaking of God's covenant that literally gave the land of Israel to the people of Israel. And the Abraham Accords is a remaking of that divides God's land. So understand how blasphemous this is. This covenant in namesake in action is a retelling of the covenant that God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So here, Exodus 32:13, remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, to whom you swore by your very self when you declared, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars of the sky, and I will give your descendants all this land that I have promised, and it shall be their inheritance. How long? Forever. No nation has the right to divvy up this land. And notice how tiny this land is. And notice the purpose here for the enemies of Israel is not just to have some land. Their purpose is their purpose is to completely destroy Israel, to push them into the sea and completely destroy them, that their name would be remembered no more. So God promised Psalm 83. Read Psalm 83. God promises that his people Israel and his land Israel would be restored in the last days. And that's what we've seen happen. For behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will restore from captivity my people Israel and Judah, declares the Lord. I will restore them to the land that I gave to their fathers, and they will possess it. And this is Jeremiah 3. We see in Jeremiah 33, we see in Jeremiah 30, verse 7, where God talks about Jacob's trouble, how it'll be the worst time, but Jacob will be saved out of it. And so this happens right before going into the tribulation period. So Israeli concerns grow. Trump reportedly plans to meet Palestinian, Syrian, and Lebanese presidents in Saudi Arabia. So again, Israel's being left out of these things. And source also added, if an announcement of American recognition of the state of Palestine is made, it will be the most important declaration that will change the balance of power in the Middle East, and more countries will join the Abraham Accords. Again, the covenant with death, the covenant with many here is the goal. And so we see this covenant with many that starts the tribulation period. This is the go to start the final seven. That's the covenant. That's the go to start the final seven is this covenant, okay? And so Daniel 9 here, the covenant with many, Daniel 9, Gabriel shared God's plan to fulfill his promise to Israel. That's 70 weeks of years. 70 times 7, or 490 years. And that was to end sin, restore Israel, bring the Messiah, and button everything up in 490 years. According to Daniel 9, so read Daniel 9, exactly according to this reckoning from the decree to rebuild, Jesus came in at 483 years. There's just 1 7 left. The final week or the final 7 years of the age is going to begin with this covenant with many. There's just 1 7 year period left. And the start of that final 7 is the covenant with many. It's this covenant when it is confirmed or made greater by the Antichrist. So this is why these developments are so incredible. And this is why people that are watching for Jesus, why we get really excited when we see these things, because we know we are so close. Once the covenant is confirmed by the Antichrist, the tribulation commences. And I don't believe that this covenant can even be confirmed while we're still here. I think we will leave before the covenant is started, possibly at the exact same moment. But I know the Antichrist cannot be revealed until after the restrainer, which I believe is the Holy Spirit in us, is taken out. So today we see the setup of a covenant promising to shield Israel from the overwhelming scourge of war. And so here we see the news here saying this week will either begin a process that will either lead to peace or World War III. And there's right now we see lots of talk about peace and lots of talk about World War III. And it is this teetering between the two. We know the white horse comes in first. The white horse of conquering comes in first, and then the red horse of war. And so there's going to be this false peace, or at least a semblance of false peace, that comes in first. So here there's the promising to deliver peace and security, peace and prosperity in exchange for dividing the land that God gave Israel. And so it's already been divided, but to continue to divide it up and have a Palestinian state. And so Land for Peace has resulted in no peace over and over again. And God told us this would happen. Just prior to him returning in fury against the Antichrist and against the nations that were responsible for this. The tribulation has two purposes. Number one, the tribulation's purpose is Jacob's trouble, to save Israel, to save Jacob. That's the number one purpose of the final 7 years, is for Israel to be saved. The second purpose is for judgment on the nations that have rejected God and went after God's people. And so there's two purposes here for the tribulation: the salvation of Israel and the destruction of the nations. And so we're seeing the setup of both of that right now as the nations are continuing to really line themselves up for judgment. Jeremiah 6:14, they dress the wound of my people with very little care, saying peace, peace, when there is no peace at all. And there won't be. There won't be peace until the Prince of Peace, until Jesus returns. And so here, this was Amir, and Amir has been very interesting because he's so upset about everything that's happening. It's really been rocking his world because he couldn't imagine that Trump would do the things that he's been doing. Um, so according to Arab sources for the Al-Quds network, Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman requested a meeting between Syrian President al-Shara and Palestinian President Abbas, Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, and U.S. President Trump. They're expected to discuss the issue of establishing a Palestinian state. Very, very bad news. And so here, an informed source told Al-Quds that Trump's meeting with the Saudi crown prince will include his counterparts in Palestine, Lebanon, and Syria. Now, I just want to pause right here because this guy is really, really interesting. This covenant, this covenant with death, this Abraham Accords cannot really go much further without him strengthening it. And as soon as he strengthens it, everybody else is going to come on board. So this guy is extremely important. The source confirmed that bin Salman is looking forward to Trump's acceptance of the Saudi condition for the establishment of a Palestinian state. Notice, they're not going to move forward unless there's a Palestinian state. And what did Trump just say today? How much he loves this guy. He loves MBS so much, and he would do anything for him. And so they're looking forward. So he looking forward to Trump's acceptance of the Saudi condition for the establishment of a Palestinian state, noting that achieving this would constitute one of the greatest and most important achievements of Saudi Arabia's active diplomacy. The source did not disclose the outcomes of the meeting. So here, Abbas, Syrian and Lebanese presidents to join Trump meeting at Saudi Arabia. So all of this coming together along with releasing the sanctions against Syria, plans to build a Trump Tower in Damascus. All this stuff is just so weird that's happening. And here we have in Isaiah 28:14, this is where God talks about this covenant with death. And we have looked at this more extensively. We've looked at the entire Isaiah 28 and really unpacked it in past teachings. But in Isaiah 28:14, we see that God clearly calls out the leaders of Israel who will make this compromise. God is very unhappy with the Israeli leaders at this time. So how we get from here to there, we don't fully know why they make the decision that they do, but we can see it approaching. We can see the puzzle pieces coming together, why they feel like they need to continue with the Abraham Accords and why they feel like this is their refuge. So remember, Israel has been returned to her land in unbelief. God tells us in Ezekiel that in the end, Israel will come back, but they'll come back in unbelief. They do not believe. They are not turned to Jesus until the tribulation. It takes Jacob's trouble in order to save them. So I know people sometimes can get upset at Israel but they're not saved. They are lost. And this is all part of the process. But their leaders are also lost. And many of them are doing things that God is very, very upset with them about. So this doesn't mean that everything that Israel does is right or good by any stretch. But God is going to keep the promises that he made to Israel, and he promised that they would keep their land. And so we have to continue to look at things from a biblical perspective and not get caught in the propaganda, because there's a lot of propaganda about it. So, and it's propaganda on both sides, because some people, are political Zionist, which is definitely not biblical. A biblical Zionist is saying, this is what God said about his land, and I'm going to support him and his land and what he said about his people. That is biblical Zionism, where you're talking about God and what he promised to his people, that he's going to do what he said he's going to do. And so, even though the nation is beginning to seek God now, they and their leaders are still in active rejection against Jesus as their Messiah. So this is a difficult place because they're starting to turn and look for Messiah. They're starting to see that the atmosphere looks similar to what it would look like when their Messiah comes. Just like we as Christians, we know the full thing. We know Jesus is coming back. And we're looking around and we're saying, wow, the atmosphere is really looking like Jesus is coming back, because he is. Well, they see this too, but they are still in rejection that Jesus is their Messiah and that he's coming back a second time. So they're looking for the first coming. They're looking for their Messiah. And so Israel is going to bend to international pressure, and they're going to believe a lie. They're going to believe that what's happening is bringing them to their Messiah, that their Messiah is going to do these things. And so they're looking for their Messiah, but they're going to fall for the Antichrist at first. And we can already see a lot of the trappings of that, because a lot of what they're doing as a nation, they're naming everything biblical names, like Gideon's Chariots, like, everything has a biblical name, and they are talking about Messiah coming, and so they're turning toward God, but they're still blinded in part, Romans 11, until the fullness of the Gentiles come in, until the rapture. They're not seeing clearly, they only see in part. And so here they're going to believe a lie. They're going to fall for the Antichrist. And understand too, all around them, they have these terrorist groups that are threatening to annihilate them. If it wasn't for their incredible defense systems, they would have been destroyed over and over again by now. I mean, if it wasn't for God and the way he has supernaturally protected them, when their defense systems didn't, they would have been destroyed over and over again. And so they see this threat, though, coming around them. And this covenant with death and hell, this is going to be the covenant that they make with the Antichrist. Israel, though, they belong to God. And so this is an ultimate form of idolatry and adultery to God, where they look to the Antichrist as a Messiah type figure. They look to him as their hero. And that is an ultimate slap in the face to God. And so we can see the puzzle pieces of this coming together. And one way that we see this with the Abraham Accords is the Heritage Foundation acquired the Abraham Accords Peace Institute. Now, this is interesting because, again, remember at the beginning we talked about Kushner. And so here, this is the Abraham Accords Institute. That is Kushner's think tank that he linked closely with the White House. Okay, so this is the Heritage Foundation acquired this. Now, why does this matter? Because when we look at who the Heritage Foundation is and what they've been doing, this brings to light how idolatrous this is. So the Heritage Foundation is now linked in. They have taken over the Abraham Accord. So this is the tribulation, and the entire earth is going to be under judgment when this covenant is made. So what God is doing with the earth is he's tilling the ground for the harvest. And it isn't just about the land of Israel, but it's also about the gospel, because he's returning his people to his land, but he's also clearing out all the paganism, all the false gospels. He's clearing out Babylon. And what we see here is Satan's last attempt, and we see this clearly with the Heritage Foundation, Satan's last attempt to fool Israel and have them looking to a man rather than look to God. And so we see here this foundation, the Heritage Foundation, is going to acquire the Abraham Accords Institute, Peace Institute. And so this was established under Jared Kushner, who is working with Trump right now on the Abraham Accords. And so why it matters here, because it is strengthening the Abraham Accords. Here we have Kushner, not only Kushner here, but also Steve Witkoff. He is part of the team here. Abraham Accords Institute. Here We also have they're working on the White House Middle East envoy with Steve Witkoff. So all of this is still part of it with the Heritage Foundation then. So why is the Heritage Foundation? Why should that make you kind of ping, 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 prophetic spidey senses go? This is the same foundation that gave Trump the crown of Jerusalem and this menorah that again is blasphemous. Okay, this menorah here, they gave this menorah to Trump for the Abraham Accords, and they gave it to him, a Covenant of Peace Award to the Prince of Peace. Even citing the messianic verse, understanding full well the Prince of Peace is the Messiah. That right there should only be given to Jesus. This is blasphemous. So this is the group. This is the group that has taken over the Abraham Accords Peace Institute. And that's why this is showing you how it isn't just about land. This is about a false gospel, and this is about a false Messiah. They are looking so hard for their Messiah, and they're looking for a man. And here they've even, and we looked at this a few months ago, I believe, when we looked at how the they were saying that the Midrash hinted, really what they were saying is what the Antichrist would do. This was just crazy how they were looking at it, thinking that the descendant of the one who destroyed the temple would be the one that would restore the temple. But we know biblically, the people of the prince that destroyed the temple are actually gonna, that's where the Antichrist comes from. So it's just very, very interesting how scripture is twisted. But I thought this was really interesting because here they're looking at Trump. They're looking so hard for a Messiah that they are actually calling Trump Messiah from the house of David. Now, they're not, like they're saying here, there does not mean that he will be the Messiah, but indicating what role he may be playing. So understand here how they are looking for a Messiah and they are willing to twist scripture however they can to put a man in that position. And so that's what's very interesting when you see this with the Abrahamic family house, you see this with the Abraham Accords, you see this with Heritage Foundation. This is all biblical. This is all spiritual. The stuff that they're doing right now, this is spiritual. There are behind the scenes, there are some very demonic things happening. And so it's not only a counterfeit Abraham Accord that we're seeing, but there's a counterfeit gospel that we really have to be on the lookout for. Part of being a watchman and or a watchwoman, part of being someone who God has put it in us to be looking for Jesus' return. Part of that is that you see not only things that are eschatological, not only things that are in times, but you also see the warnings. False teachers, false prophets, false gospels, they drive me insane. As much as I want to stand up and be praising God and be yelling, Jesus is coming back, everybody turn to Jesus, turn to Jesus. I also want to stand up and scream and yell at all the false prophets and all the false teachers and all the false gospels out there because they're leading people away from Jesus and it drives me mad. And I think part of that is because that is how God geared us. We see it coming. And so, this counterfeit gospel, dividing God's land, would be bad enough. This is horrible that we're seeing this happen. But tied to this push of the counterfeit covenant is also a push for the counterfeit gospel, twisting God's truth into universalism, that all paths lead to God. Because we see this, the Abraham Accords is tied. See here, look at this article right here. opinion why the Abraham Accords matter. And what is their picture right here? The Abrahamic family house. Here it's talking about dividing the land of Israel. It's talking about coexistence with the Israel's neighbors and normalization, which in order to have this, they have to divide the land. That's part of the reading between the lines. That is part of the deal. But here, the picture is the three faiths, the three Abrahamic faiths combined: a mosque, a synagogue, and a Catholic church. So it's interesting because here we have it combined, the false gospels together with counterfeit gospel with counterfeit covenant. So all paths do not lead to God, only Jesus. Jesus is very clear. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So we see this push for coexistence and unification of nations and religions happening simultaneously. We see all this happening together, and it's no accident. We're seeing the beast system and the Babylonian harlot church rise together because what happens? The Babylon harlot rides the beast system into the tribulation. Now, shortly after, the beast turns on the harlot and destroys her, and it hates her. So I think it's interesting to see how that's going to turn out. But um, we see they ride in together into the tribulation together. So here, um, while in the UAE, I visited the inspiring Abrahamic family house, a symbol of a region in the Middle East of transformation from one of isolation to unity and tolerance. Again, this is all one world religion, a false gospel that there is no hope and there is no salvation. And so the lie here is coexistence of faith, that all roads lead to the same place. Um, Isaiah 29:13, therefore the Lord said, these people draw near to me with their mouths. This has really stepped out on me lately because people will say something that sounds good, but their actions are so opposite. So therefore the Lord said, these people draw near to me with their mouths and honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me. Their worship of me is but rules taught by men, commandments of men. And so this really jumped out at me because we had, after the Pope's death, we had Graham first coming out and praying about who the new Pope would be, which is just horrible because that is a false religious system. So again, it's this unification, it's this coexistence, it's this ecumenicalism that does not lead to salvation. People care more about politics than they do about salvation. And Charlie Kirk right here, man, that man is a wolf and a snake. And the first time my husband and I saw him on Jack Hibbs, we were like, red flag, red flag. We were like, what? Who? Why on earth does he have this guy on there? Because he just made our stomach turn. And we see they start to show who they are. And so get this, okay? We talk about a golden age in America. First off, we're going to look at golden age. This is a pagan, satanic thing. Stop it. We need to be aware, and he should know better. We talk about a golden age in America. I am an evangelical Christian. I don't think so. But I pray the new pope will help usher in a new golden age of Christianity. He does not care about people's souls, or he wouldn't do this. This man is way too smart to be this stupid. If the new pope defends the faith, defends the West, defends biology and eternal truths, okay, eternal truth is salvation, which this new pope and every pope that claims that they are Christ, that they are the representation of the church and infallible, obviously they are not defending eternal truths. Okay, sorry. I will be his biggest fan. You can't tell this man this angers me. This is ridiculous. So, okay, do not have anything to do with Charlie Kirk. He is a snake and he's just showing. The good thing about this is these snakes and these wolves, they are telling you who they are. So, our responsibility when they tell us who they are is to believe them and stop listening to them. Just because you might like their political view, understand he is not on the same team that we're on. If you're a Christian, that is where your identity is. And so this is Richard Watchman said this. Charlie Kirk is doing Charlie Kirk things. Remember how many pastors and churches invited this man to come in and speak propaganda to their congregations. If you've been paying attention, this should not shock you. And it didn't shock me. Mystery religion. So why did he say mystery religion? Golden age. Where does golden age come from? Because people need to stop this. They need to understand where this came from. Alice Bailey wrote decades ago, 1957, that 2025, and she's not the first one that said this, okay? This is a new age satanic belief that the year 2025 would be the year of the long awaited satanic golden age. This is all about the age of Saturn. Um, and there's been so much symbology. They know full well what they're doing with this golden age stuff. They know. These people know what they're doing. Helena Blakovich acknowledged Saturn as the king of the golden age. In many different traditions, this is also a direct relationship between the awakening of the higher mind and the emergence of golden ages. So right now you hear a lot about awakening, you hear a lot about a golden age. This is all New Age and Satanism that is even creeping into the church because people don't know. The magician of the Golden Dawn, again, Golden Age, satanic, big 2025 prophetic markers here. And one of these was Alice Bailey predicting that the Messiah, we know that would be the Antichrist, they're expecting the Antichrist to show up this year. Um, but her so-called savior sounds a lot like the Antichrist rather than that. So, and that 2025 would be a time of the golden age or the age of Aquarius. And so here we see paganism, guys. But people don't know because people don't know what the enemy is up to. And that's okay, but sometimes we need to be as innocent as a dove, but we need to be wise as a serpent. We need to know what the enemy is up to and no longer propagate it, no longer be part of it, and understand what they're saying when they say some of these catchphrases and don't take part in it. So, why is religion center in this deal, in the covenant with many, in this forming of the counterfeit gospel, all of that? Jesus quoted um so right here we see this sorry, the page before here that they are 13 here, that they draw near to me with their mouths and they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. We see a lot of that right now because a lot of people claim to be Christians, but they are actually behind all this stuff. But they know most Christians, if you just say the right thing, they're not gonna figure out what you're actually doing. We need to pay attention to fruits. That's why God talks about fruit, that you'll know them by their fruit. Don't get caught up in what their mouths say, because we know that can be very, very misleading. So here Jesus quoted that verse 13 in Matthew 15, 7 through 9. And Paul actually explained this further in Romans 11. Israel has been blinded in part. When you read the context of what I just read in verse 13, it's about the blindness and blind leading blind. And so Israel has been blinded in part. And they've been blinded in part until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. Romans 11 explains that. The book, the Bible, is becoming unsealed today. We see things more clearly because we're so far down the road. But Israel won't be able to perceive this until they receive Jesus as a whole in the tribulation. Israel as a whole, as a nation, is going to be blinded until they receive Jesus. And so here I want to, this is just, I do think that this guy's a joke, but I, I, I don't believe he's just an anomaly that's popped up. I believe he is, I believe he's an actor. I mean, no, he's an actor. He was, he investigated cults and then he started his own. But it's very interesting the way that he does things, and he is all about the three Abrahamic faiths as well. And so now here, Israel 365 is quoting him, calling him the Mahdi, which no group actually takes this guy seriously, but he is actually forming a following. So he is interesting to keep an eye on. But here they're saying that he is calling Arabs to build the Jewish temple in Jerusalem and exodus Palestinians from Gaza. So it's interesting because he's actually calling for what the Antichrist will do. And so I bet he'll take credit for a lot of this. He's taking credit for the Pope's death. He says that he is the rightful Pope and all this. He's crazy. But we also see the new Pope Leo. One of the reasons that he chose his name was because he wants to really head out in AI. And again, we've seen so much with AI. Even today, the big push with this infrastructure that we know is going to be vital for the beast system. And I think AI is going to be a big part of the image of the beast and how they can control everybody. So that is interesting how he wants to really lead out and be part of working to bring AI. Memorial Mass for Pope Francis was at the Abrahamic family house. So again, this there's this repeated pattern of the three Abrahamic faiths. So the final thought here is there's no time to be ignorant anymore. We need to be in the Bible and we need to have our eyes opened, looking at things from a biblical perspective. We're living in the fulfillment of this amazing mystery right here. Romans 11:25-31. For I would not want you, brethren, to be ignorant of this mystery. And we are in this mystery right now. At least you should be wise in your own conceits. That blindness in part has happened to Israel. And we see that. Israel is still in blindness until when? Until the fullness of the Gentiles come in. And so all Israel shall be saved. They're all going to be saved at the end of the tribulation. They're all saved through the tribulation. All Israel will be saved, as it's written, there shall come out of Zion the deliverer, and shall turn away ungodliness from Jacob. For this is my covenant unto them, when I shall take away their sins. As concerning the gospel, they are enemies for your sakes. But as touching the election, they are beloved for the Father's sakes. For the gifts and the calling of God are without repentance. God is going to finish what God promised to Israel. For as ye in times past have not believed God, but have now obtained mercy through their unbelief, even so have these also now not believed, though through your mercy they may obtain mercy. And so here, they've been blinded in part for our benefit, but God will save them. Through the tribulation, God will save them. So God, give mercy to those who will obtain your mercy speedily, Father, and help those to no longer hold on to their own understanding, but to seek a biblical worldview and to seek seeing all these things through a biblical worldview, especially this week as we see so much unfolding. We need to be careful to not hold on to our prejudices and hold on to our political understandings, but instead ask God to help you to see what's happening from a biblical point of view, because things happening this week are very interesting and we are seeing things move really, really quick. And we have Since January, things are truly warp speed. Okay, truly warp speed, pun completely intended. Everything is happening super, super fast. We are so quickly being set up for the tribulation period. And what comes first? The rapture. And so look up, be encouraged, and let go of this world because our King, he really is coming. And I believe we are so close to seeing his face. So this is the most exciting time to be alive. So I hope you guys are blessed. And oh my goodness. Join me in Telegram if you want to try to keep up with what's going on. Or Keegan Fernandez is awesome. End Times Headlines is awesome. That's a great way to kind of keep up with everything that's going on because it's happening so quickly. You're definitely not going to know what's going on if you're just watching like the regular news. You're not going to be able to keep up and see it, especially if you watch it then there you're seeing the narrative and you want to look past the narrative and look at it from a biblical perspective. So God bless you guys, and I'll see you next week.